welcome to my channel. Today I'm very excited to share with you my recipe for cachupa. Again, these recipes can vary depending on which islands you're from and can contain different ingredients. This is simply the way that my mom and my grandmother made it, and so I thought I'd share it with you all. So I hope you all enjoy it. Cachupa is basically soaking all of the dry beans overnight, which is key. So the first step is to soak your pig kidney beans overnight, dry pigeon beans, rock beans, lima beans, and then we have a 1-to-1 ratio mix of dried yellow hominy and the white hominy. And those are all soaked overnight. And then in the morning or about close to noontime, you can start making your cachupa dish. I generally begin the cachupa dish with making what we call a hafagad, which is basically you saute diced onions, tomatoes, cilantro, and I have fresh peeled garlic cloves here, which I'm going to crush prior to putting into that. So this is how I crush my garlic. I typically drop some salt on top, and then I begin crushing it. In this pot is some salted pork. This pork was salted over 2 days and then rinsed, and then you basically slow cook it in water. Be sure to fill the pot with water, as you're going to use some of this water as a reserve afterwards. And I just let that slow cook on low heat while I prepare the rest of the dish. Start up with 2 pots, and in both pots I've put some olive oil, and I'm just going to let that heat up. Sauteing the mixture of cilantro, tomatoes, onions. I'm going to add half the crushed garlic to this pot, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here in this pot. And I'm basically going to let this saute until the onions turn translucent. So I'm going to crush 2 of these cubes, 1 for each pot, and I'm also going to crush these cloves and add that to the pot. I crush these because then you don't get a mouthful of them or bite them while you're eating the food, or you don't have to look for them when you're done cooking the meal. So in each pot I've added about 6 crushed cloves along with a crushed full beef cube, bullion cube, and see how these onions are nice and translucent. Those are about done. And then we did the same thing over here in this pan, and those are also about done. Step, I've filled both pots about halfway full of water, and I'm going to let those come to a boil. Obviously I'm going to cover each pot so that they do that quickly, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now that both pots have come to a boil, I'm going to add in about 2 bay leaves to each pot, and then I'm going to, in the next step, add, in this pot I'm going to add the combination of white and yellow hominy. This can boil for about a minute to start, and then you want to decrease the heat and let it simmer on low. And this is probably going to take about 45 minutes or so to cook. So in this pot, I've combined all of my beans that were soaked overnight into that sauteed mixture there. So I'm going to let this cook for about 45 minutes on low heat. Same thing over here. I've got my hominy. See it there, the combination of yellow and white, and that's also going to cook on slow heat for about 45 minutes. I like to use 2 separate pots for the simple fact that the cooking times may vary amongst these beans, and you don't want some of the beans to be mushier than the rest. You want them to have a nice cooked yet solid consistency, and so that's my rationale for using 2 ingredients. I'm going to start preparing my kale. I have purple kale here. Traditionally in this dish it's green kale that is used, which is the Portuguese kale. Where I'm located I have difficulty finding the green kale, and so I'm using purple kale, and it accomplishes the same task, but the traditional dish does call for the green kale. And what I've done here is I've began to chop this, and so I'm going to prep this and add it to my slow simmering pork. I'm going to go ahead and add the kale, and it's going to look like a lot, but this is probably going to wilt down to almost nothing by the time it's done cooking. And so I will add that to the pot. I'm going to cover it and allow that to cook along with the pork, because it will take a little while to cook as well. So as you can see, the kale has cooked down quite a bit in this pot, so I'm going to add in what we have for fresh pigeon peas, which is about a cup's worth. And I'm going to mix that in and let that cook. And as you can see, our beans continue to simmer over here. In this pot, I have added in the fresh watercress, which is going to pretty much wilt down to nothing but add a ton of flavor to the stew. And then over here, you can see our beans are pretty much cooked. We're about 45 minutes in at this point. And if you look here, we have our hominy that's also cooked. At this point, I've transferred the hominy into a much larger pot. I'm gonna let this cook a little further on low heat. Careful with this pot because the higher the heat, the higher the likelihood that you stick it to the bottom of the pot and burn it. As you can see, we have our finished product here, some delicious cachupa. All of the ingredients have been combined into this pot. We're several hours into the process now, but it is definitely cooked and ready to serve. Our finished product is ready to eat. As you can see, there are no sides served with this. It is a hearty and delicious, very filling dish. It needs no accompaniment.